So today we have another block study block, and I have chosen Road to Oklahoma. Almost. So before we get started in this video, I have a confession to make. I filmed this whole video, all the tutorials, sewed all the blocks, even made an entire quilt top for my Road to Oklahoma block study video that you are watching right now. And it wasn't until I was all done and I was bringing up some additional little fun history facts about this block that I realized that I have made all of mine wrong. So if you look at the quilt behind me, the white square here should be on the outside and the background should meet the diagonal line of black. And I did it on all of them. I even did it on the free downloadable pattern for you guys. So this is not the Road to Oklahoma. It's like, I don't know, the road to Megan's house, I guess. I don't know. But I like the result. I like the quilt top. And all of the measurements that you're about to see are all still correct for making a Road to Oklahoma block. But if you want it to be authentic, then you need to make it look like the block I'm putting up in the corner of this video right now, where the kind of star quadrants of this block are rotated appropriately. However, if you want to make this quilt, then follow the video you're about to see. That being said, the PDF pattern is available on my website for free. I'll put the link in the description below. And we are going to do our usual setup of blocks. We have the Perfect for a Layer Cake square, which finished at 16. We have the Fat Quarter Friendly version, which is a massive 32-inch block. And then we have the block that we're going to be making today, which is the 12-inch standard, swap-friendly, fits in every sampler quilt kind of block. And there's also an additional page for the teeny tiny piecing blocks, but I just couldn't bring myself to make one. I just didn't have it in me today. So if you make one, send me a picture of it and I will ooh and ah over it because I know how much work went into it. So let's get to it. So let's jump in and make our 12-inch Road to Oklahoma block. I have my pattern here right next to my lukewarm cup of coffee, but we're going to power through. And I have all of my squares that I need for this block already pre-cut. So for this block, we need a couple of squares in 3 fabrics. We need 6 background squares that are 3.5 inches. We need 4 color A squares that are 3.5 inches, and we need 2 color B 3.5 inch squares. And then we also need 2 background and 2 color B squares that are 4 inches. Now the assembly of this block is really beginner friendly. There's really only kind of one preparatory step. We need to turn these larger squares into half square triangles. So to make these half square triangle units, all we need to do is draw a line from diagonal to diagonal. So I just align my ruler. So I find that if I start kind of on the fabric and work off, then I don't distort the bias of the fabric, or I don't kind of pull those tiny little bits of fibers in that point of the fabric kind of out of alignment. So I start on the fabric, draw out, and then finish. Now we are going to take this over to our machine and we are going to stitch 1/4 inch on either side of this line. So now we just need to sew 1/4 inch on either side of this line that we drew. My stitch length is super long right now. Let's just crank that down. So I don't ever think I've discussed my preferred stitch length in a video. I sew at a really small stitch length. I have my machine set at 1.6 or 1.8 pretty much all the time unless I'm doing top stitching. And I feel like it just gives me a stronger seam, especially since I often press my blocks open. I want to make sure that that thread is really holding those pieces together. So now that I have sewn 1/4 inch on either side of this center line, it's time to cut. And I'm just going to align my ruler back up with that line and cut with this excessively large rotary cutter. And now we have our 2 matched half square triangle units. So now we need to repeat that with this other set of 4-inch squares. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you how I trim them down to make them really precisely 3.5 inches. Because my instructions always include a little bit of trimming room. I feel like you can be really careful, but I've never been able to get my half square triangles to come out exactly the right size. So I always add just a little bit to my initial measurements so that I can trim them down and make them perfect, so it all nests and comes together really nicely in the finished block. So I'll show you how I trim them down. But I'm going to go ahead and make the other half square triangles and get them pressed. Okay, I have pressed and trimmed 3 of my blocks, and I thought that we would do a little experiment. You know that I usually press my blocks open, my seam allowance is open. So I have done half of them, these 2, open, and then I pressed these 2 to the side. So I'm going to use the ones that are pressed open on the side and the ones that are pressed closed on the opposite side. And we'll see kind of where the bulk ends up being in this block as we assemble it. And we'll see if taking the time to press open really does help you in this block. As I said before, I am awful at figuring out where seam allowance bulk is going to end up, which is why I press everything open. But we'll test it. So I have this block ready to trim, and this is one of the ones that I pressed to the side. So I have my little 3.5-inch ruler here. Now I love rulers, so I have this exact size that I need. If you don't, you can certainly use a larger ruler. You will just trim this side and then flip it around and line up that 3.5-inch line with the sides you trimmed and then cut around again. But I have this little tiny ruler that I hardly ever get to use because it's kind of an awkward, tiny size. So I'm going to use it while I can. Now if I was on my rotating cutting mat, I wouldn't bother picking up my block, but this cutting mat does not rotate, obviously. And there we go. Now we have our 4 perfectly trimmed and sized half square triangles. Now it's time to lay out our block, and this is where I want to share with you guys kind of the trick of maximizing your efficiency when you chain piece. This block is a 16 patch, which means it is kind of 4 columns of 4 blocks. So you could assemble this like you would like a 9 patch, where you sew the blocks into rows and then you sew the rows into the whole block. But there's an easier way, especially when you are looking at a block like this that has some repeating elements. Like if we look at this and divide this into 4, you'll see that it's really 4 patches. And even beyond that, these 2 are the same and these 2 are the same. So let's just go ahead and lay out our block, and I'll show you what I mean by stacking the sections together. So here's our block completely laid out. Now we could sew these 2 together and then add this one and kind of complete this row. But that would be a lot of starting and stopping the sewing process. And chain piecing is really efficient because you don't have to start and stop between every little section of sewing that you're doing. So when I'm looking at a block like this, I see a lot of opportunity to make my life easier. So these blocks are the same. So let's stack them. So now we'll be chain piecing these 2 and chain piecing these 2. And now these blocks are the same. So let's stack those up. And now this stack and this stack is really the same. So now we only have 3 different seams to sew and keep organized, instead of stopping and starting 16 times between each section of the block. So I'm going to work through this stack, switch to this stack, and then do all of these. And then I can clip all my seams, press them, and then I'll be ready to easily make this 4-patch and this 4-patch. And then I'll just have one 4-patch to sew together of these units. But we'll get there. So I'm back. I pressed all my pieces and they're nice and steamy hot. So I have all of my piles organized exactly as they were before, and now it is time to make our 4 patches. So this is really easy, like obviously these two go together. Now this is a pile of 4, and we need to make sure that we turn this into a 4-patch. So we just take 2 and rotate it, and now we have our 4-patch back. So I wanted to continue our little pressing to the side, pressing open experiment. So I have 2 of my 4-patch kind of units pressed to the color A, and the bottom set is pressed open. So now it's just time to sew these 2 together and these 2 together. So I have my 4 patches all assembled and pressed, and now we're ready to assemble the final block. So the final block has really easy construction since we've kind of made the quadrants separately. So I did go ahead and spiral the kind of center points on these 2 quadrants where I pressed everything to the side. And that just helps that little center bulk lay a little bit flatter. If you've never done this before, so when you press open your seam, and it'll look like this. So what you do is you just grab that seam allowance, and these 2 inner parts, the green, there's going to be just like 1 or 2 stitches kind of holding those together, and you're just going to pry them apart a little bit. And you're not going to go past this cross seam. That cross seam is what's going to keep the center from unraveling. You're just going to pull just that. You can see the little threads right there that I pulled open. And then when you lay your block flat, you can push what in my block is the green to opposite sides, and it makes this little checkerboard in the middle, and it will just help your block lay nice and flat. Now you just lay out your block. Oh, I laid it out wrong. Now I am going to go ahead and just sew this together as a 4-patch, which means I'll be sewing this seam. I'll put these right sides together and sew that seam. And then I will put these together and sew that seam. So I've pressed my pieces, and I have 2 kind of half blocks ready for the final seam of the block. And I'm just going to put them right sides together and sew that last seam across the center of the block. And because there are so many intersections, I am going to take just a minute to pin this before I sew it. So my block is done. I really like this. I did end up pressing that final center seam open. I guess kind of on autopilot, let's be honest. So let's take a look at this and see what we think. Okay, so this is our final block. All of my little points matched up really nicely. That one's a little off, but we'll just ignore that. Now, as far as the bulk, now I haven't flipped this over, so I don't remember which side is which. I'm going to say this side, like these feel a little flatter than those. Let's see, which is which. Okay, I was right. The pressed open seams are a little flatter, but this rotation does really help. So I would really recommend, if you are a press to the side, go ahead and spin these little 4-patch centers, because it will really help. I guess that's it for this block. What'd you think? This is a really nice simple block. It's a lot of sewing together squares. There's these little half square triangles. So 2 at a time half square triangles are a really great beginner technique. In a block like this, where it's mostly just sewing together squares, a couple little half square triangles thrown in can add a lot of interest. And when you sew these blocks together, like if you were to make a whole quilt, these corners, when they come together, are going to make a really nice, almost star-like effect. So I actually liked this block so much that I made a whole quilt top of it in the kind of fat quarter size version of the block. Let me hang out my quilt top and I'll show you. So here is my whole quilt top that I made from this block, and I used white text prints and all of my black text prints to contrast with this awesome kind of Kona pickle color that is my favorite Kona color, so I was really looking for an excuse to use it. And you can see what I mean about these half square triangles right here. When they come together at the points of a block, they make almost this star looking shape. You get this nice secondary pattern from those very simple quilt blocks. So that's it for this version of Block Study. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that you had a little bit of fun. I enjoyed our little pressing experiment, and I'm really glad that this came out as well as it did. I totally love this quilt. So I haven't picked a block for the next block study, so if you have any requests, I would love to hear them. So leave a comment in the comment section below, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another block study. Until then, there are going to be some videos popping up in the corner of the screen here that are other videos that you might enjoy with free patterns, or a video that YouTube thinks that you will love. So happy quilting, and I will see you guys next Monday morning.